Welcome back. Yep, it is power rankings time. So, without any further ado, after a long day of hockey, let's get into the power rankings from what was Hockey Day in Canada. And there's some Canadian teams that are having some pretty good times right now, so it's going to feel like more Hockey Day in Canada stuff with this power rankings. So, starting at number 32, because we start at the bottom, we work our way up. That's how the power rankings work. Number 32 on the board is Anaheim. The Anaheim Ducks, rough week for them. It ends with a loss against the Sharks, and it was as ugly as, I mean, come on now, that's but yeah, number 32 is Anaheim. Rough week for them. We'll see if they're still 32nd before I go down to California. Could be awkward. Hoping they're not 32nd when I get down there. But at any rate, yeah, that's where they're at this week. They didn't have a great week. Number 31, moving up one spot from last week. Sharks. San Jose Sharks, number 31. So they move up one spot. That's just strictly from the win over Anaheim. Plus, the work ethic with San Jose is always there. And Logan Couture's back. Couture looked really good for them tonight. Honestly, I thought San Jose had a good game. And like once they started getting shots on net, they had a good game. It was just it was a matter of getting shots on the net. And then once they had that figured out, they were pretty good. And so, yeah, San Jose moves up a spot. I hope it doesn't go to their heads. Number 30, moving up one spot from last week as well, Chicago. The Hawks, minus Bedard, we had expected just basically loss after loss after loss. It hasn't really turned out that way for the Chicago Blackhawks. They move up one spot from last week, and yeah, they're making a game of it. It's always more entertaining to watch the games when they're close. It's more entertaining to watch the games when you're not quite sure who's going to win, and I'm glad that Chicago's left that little bit of uncertainty out there as to whether or not they could lose, but maybe they won't. Number 29, we get into a stretch here where things have stayed very similar, and it's because in the case of Columbus, you know, what's funny is they did move up a spot this week at one point, and then they ended up right back in 29th. So for Columbus, they are 29th this week, continuing to roll towards another offseason of uncertainty. And what are we going to see with them? Which players are going to stay? Which ones are going to go? And what do you do with some of the veterans if you're trying to basically make that lineup a winning lineup for next season? Because Columbus has been losing long enough, and I would think next season they're going to want to at least get back to, if not playoffs, at least in the hunt for playoffs. Number 28, same spot as last week as well. Ottawa. So for the Ottawa Senators, I did go back and forth on whether or not they belonged ahead of Columbus or Columbus ended up ahead of Ottawa. But I don't think that overthinking it makes much of a difference. The Ottawa Senators, it's been a really rough year. They've now officially reached the halfway mark of their season, 16, 24, and 1. And that's not the record they wanted. I think 24, 16, and 1 would have been closer to what fans would have wanted to see from them. And so, as we've seen changes being made by other organizations, there's some question about whether or not they should go out and find a permanent replacement at head coach. It definitely looks like they're sticking to their plan of waiting until the offseason, but I know when Patrick Waugh gets hired, there's going to be teams that say, man, we wanted him for our team. Well, fan bases that say they want him for that team, and probably some media as well. But for Ottawa, they're staying the course at this point. Number 27, also staying the course. Buffalo. The Buffalo Sabres, no movement up, no movement down. And this is where we're into that part of the season where there are just teams that when the games are finished, and I look at my board, I say those teams are in the right place. This is what I've tried to explain before, that if a team wins or loses, it does not necessarily mean they move up the board. If a team loses 3 games in a row, they're probably going to drop. Team wins 3 games in a row, they're probably going to go up. But not necessarily. It depends on how they win against who and just, you know, what are their prospects. In Buffalo's case, not great. They had back-to-back shutouts, but they were over Chicago and San Jose, and then they lose their next game out. So Buffalo doesn't move up. If they'd lost those games against Chicago and San Jose, they would have dropped, though. Number 26, also in the same spot as last week. Should I promise you guys there'll be movement on the board? Should I make that promise? So Minnesota stays in the bottom row. They lost that game against Tampa Bay. The next night they come out and they got that win over Florida. So an embarrassing loss and a pretty nice win, and it ends up with them staying in the same spot. For the Minnesota Wild, they've won 3 of their last 10 with that win in their last game out. Tomorrow they are in Carolina. I don't like their chances in Carolina, but the Canes are unpredictable too. So we'll see. We'll see how that all works out. One thing I do want to put together to basically make a video of before I go on vacation and post while I'm on vacation is looking at how unpredictable this season's been. I'm just trying to figure out exactly how to measure that. But Minnesota's been pretty unpredictable from one game to the next. Just they've been tending to move in the wrong direction standings wise. Number 25, staying in the same spot as last week. And you know what's funny is Montreal coming into today, they were in this third row. They were absolutely here, but then they lost 9-4 against Boston. So a loss against Boston isn't embarrassing, but a 9-4 loss is. And so I couldn't have them ahead of the teams I had them ahead of coming into tonight. They end up dropping back into 25th. So in the bottom row, basically what happens is Anaheim drops a couple of spots. The 2 teams they were ahead of move up. Other than that, everybody else stays in the same spot. So good night, everybody. I'm just kidding. We start seeing some movement in the next row. So number 24, dropping 6 spots from last week. Patrick Waugh can't arrive fast enough, can he? The New York Islanders, they were getting their points. They weren't winning as many games as I felt like they should. There was complaints about my power rankings at that point. We all remember. And eventually, yeah, the Islanders broke their way up the board a little bit with some nice wins, but it's petered out lately. The Islanders 2-6-2 in their last 10. And tomorrow night they're at home against Dallas, the debut of Patrick Waugh behind the bench. I assume he'll be behind the bench tomorrow night. I have no reason to think he wouldn't be. Should be fun. I look forward to seeing if it's going to change the style of hockey that the Islanders play. So yeah, the Islanders 24th this week, a drop of 6 spots, and I don't think it'll be nearly as upsetting to fans of the Islanders as it was earlier in the season when they felt like the Islanders were too low on the board. Number 23, dropping 2 spots from last week. St. Louis isn't bad. They're not a bad team, but they're not exactly in the hunt. Like the weird thing is that with the points being where they're at, right? You have so many teams that are basically within 4 or 6 points of one another. So there's a lot of teams that aren't out of it. St. Louis isn't out of it, but there's that one up, one down situation they tend to go through. Right now they're 22-20-2. So are they going to end up in the playoffs? I don't think they will. It feels like in the West things are getting a little bit tougher in terms of making the playoffs. I don't think St. Louis gets there, but maybe. If they can play like they did against Washington, against other teams, they may be able to put some people to sleep with the fact that there's not very many chances, but they may also win their share of games as well. So we'll see if they can stick to that. Because one thing that St. Louis showed tonight that's encouraging, despite their drop, defense. The defense for St. Louis has been their Achilles heel for a while. So we'll see if they can do that beyond just the game against Washington. Number 22, same spot as last week. So another team staying in the same spot is Arizona. I was almost impressed with how in Vancouver, they lose the game, but they drew Vancouver into playing their style of game, and they slowed it to a crawl at points. Arizona's a decent team. I do feel like for the Arizona Coyotes, they should stay in the hunt, but probably end up coming up short when it comes to the playoffs. But if I told Arizona fans at the start of the year, hey, you guys are going to be hanging around the playoff race, you can be a little bit above NHL 500 through the halfway mark of the season, I think most would have taken it. And there is still that chance that if Arizona decides to do something crazy like add at the deadline, they have the cap space, they could make that work. And they absolutely could probably get a pretty good player as well, because there's teams trying to trade contracts once you get to the deadline. So we'll see what Arizona does. Might they be tempted to buy just a little bit, just a little bit of buying at the deadline, just to see what you can do. Number 21, dropping 2 spots from last week, Capitals. So the Caps drop a couple of spots. Again, tonight they played their game, but so did St. Louis, and St. Louis beat them at it. So the Washington Capitals dropped to 21st on the board. They're winning enough games that they're staying in the hunt. They're losing enough games that I don't think they end up getting there. But they're doing it while Ovechkin's not scoring. And it does feel like we've gotten to a point now where it's not even really being talked about as much with Ovechkin's. We've kind of accepted that, yeah, his scoring just isn't there anymore. It's gone. And if that's the case through the end of the season, what does OV do? What did the Capitals do? Obviously, Kuznetsov wanted out last year. I can't see why he would still want to be there necessarily if he wanted to be out last year. But who would take on Kuznetsov's contract? There's a lot of unanswered questions, and yet, with all of those detractions, they're still in the hunt, in large part because of Charlie Lindgren and because of the systems they play and the fact that they do have an ability to suffocate a game. Number 20 on the board, moving up 4 spots from last week, Calgary. So the Flames move up to 20th. They did lose the game against Edmonton tonight. I thought they played well. I thought they had a decent game. Obviously, there was a bit of a fluke goal there for Edmonton that ends up getting them the lead and ultimately the win. And these things can happen. Vladar, I thought, played really, really well in terms of goals saved above expected. Markstrom leads one list I was looking at today. So, yeah, the Flames are doing well. And I think Blake Coleman's a big part of the reason why the Flames are staying in the hunt. So they move up 4 spots from last week. Kudos to the Flames. Number 19, moving up 1 spot from last week. So not a huge move, but it's a move. And it's Pittsburgh. The Penguins, they had the loss tonight against Vegas. They had a 2-0 lead going into the third period there. It's not shameful to lose against Vegas in that manner. They're not the first team to do it. Is it frustrating? I'm sure it's really frustrating for those players, but just in general, it does happen. Vegas in third periods at home has been known to be deadly throughout their entire existence. So Pittsburgh still ends up moving up the 1 spot. We'll see what they do this coming week. Number 18, dropping 4 spots from last week. They just can't stay in that second row, can they? It's the New Jersey Devils. The goaltending question is going to be out there. Nico Dawes' numbers were really good until tonight. They take a major hit against Dallas. But as I mentioned in the review, and I'm going to mention again here, the defense for New Jersey tonight was non-existent at points. I would watch Dallas put in a goal and I go, that's a really nice goal. But there probably should have been somebody in the way to prevent that goal. Not by taking a penalty or anything, but somebody out there to play that defensive game so that Dallas can't just get those goals and run up the score. Number 16, also or 17, also dropping 4 spots from last week. Seattle. Seattle dropping into the third row. It's going to be interesting to see how their game tomorrow night at home against Toronto goes. Toronto's been in not necessarily a free fall, but dropping absolutely. And Seattle had those 9 wins in a row. Now they've lost 3 in a row. Is it going to become 4, or are they going to win? Seattle's kind of in this interesting place where they're close enough to the playoffs that I would totally understand if Ron Francis went out and added, but they're also far enough out and their roster looks iffy enough that if he decided to do a soft sell at the deadline where you sell off a few players who are, pending unrestricted free agents without selling the whole team off, I would understand that as well. So I'll be interested to see which route he takes, or maybe a mix of both. Maybe he'll do a mix of both. Number 16. Dropping 5 spots from last week. And absolutely troubling results for these guys lately. They did get a win tonight. That's the LA Kings. So the Kings stay in the top 16 because they won tonight. If LA had lost that game tonight at home against the Rangers, they would have been in the third row, which is where they were coming into today. So for the Kings, pretty major drop for them overall. They've lost a lot of games. They've won, I think it's 2 of their last 12, and it's been this slow descent. Like they were losing games where you could say, well, maybe if this puck bounces this way, but it was getting really ugly. So maybe tonight's game against the Rangers shows they've done a reset. Maybe the fact they got so close to the playoff line kind of made them say, hey, we're on the verge of dropping below the playoff line. We've got to get it together. But either way, LA gets the win tonight. And we'll see if this is a sign they're ready to turn things around. I don't know if they were as good as that 11-game winning streak on the road to start the season showed, but I don't think they're as bad as they've been over the last 12 games either. Number 15, moving up 1 spot from last week, Nashville. Preds, a team that I don't think I would want to see in the first round for a team that I cheer for, which could happen. Nashville kind of scares me. Saros has not had a great regular season. He's had some iffy numbers here and there. I don't know if I'd want to play against him in the playoffs. I don't know if like, and I say it like I would be out on the ice, but I mean, if a team I'm cheering for, I don't know if I'd want to see a team I'm cheering for against Saros in the playoffs. Although if it was Demko versus Saros, bring it on. That could be some great goaltending matchups. But Nashville is a playoff team right now. I don't see any reason to think they can't still be a playoff team. You look at the teams that are in this row. Obviously, Seattle has the potential. Calgary has the potential. And Arizona and St. Louis have some potential as well. But I like Nashville's chances above Arizona and Seattle or St. Louis, even though Arizona did beat Nashville yesterday. So there's that. Number 14 on the board, dropping 5 spots from last week. It's not the biggest drop, but it's close. It is Toronto. So Toronto is still in the second row. I'm sure there will be arguments they shouldn't be in the second row. If they'd lost against Calgary as well, I would have them in the third row. But they did beat Calgary. They lost to Edmonton. They lost to Vancouver. Edmonton and Vancouver are towards the top of the board. So that's kind of how I like to do this, which is if you lose to teams at the top of the board, I don't necessarily mete out a punishment that's quite as much as if you lose against the bottom teams. And as I said, we would see more from Toronto after these games against California teams, maybe where they're at. And so far, the returns have not been that encouraging. So Toronto's going to have to try to turn this around. As I mentioned before, they're going to be in Seattle tomorrow. That's going to be a very interesting game. See if Toronto can bounce back, because that had to be a discouraging result in Vancouver for them tonight. All right, number 13 on the board. Moving up 10. 10 spots. 10 spots. Yep. Detroit impressed the hell out of me this week. I just, watching Detroit, watching their play, and I just said, they look like a playoff team. They look like a team that should be top 3 in the Atlantic. Really, really solid play from the Detroit Red Wings. And again, because I know I do see the comments, he hates Detroit, look where Detroit is. No, but the way they played this week, they looked fantastic. Lions giving them the goaltending they need. They're kind of firing on all cylinders. They're 7-2-1 in their last 10. They did lose their last game, but they still jump way up because they're playing really well. So this is again where a win doesn't necessarily mean moving up, a loss doesn't necessarily mean moving down, and in this case, I didn't punish Detroit even though they lost their last game this week. Number 12, moving up 5 spots from last week. So this is where the movement shows up. The movement on the board is really in the top half, which is unusual. But Tampa Bay moves up to number 12. So they move from 17 to 12. Tampa Bay is starting to look like the Stanley Cup champion Lightning. Tampa Bay is starting to look like a team that you don't want to meet in the playoffs. And they got a really good game from Johansson, too. So Johansson apparently has had enough rest. I think they were overplaying him while Vasilevsky was out, which, I mean, I understand why. Their other options weren't fantastic. But, yeah, Tampa Bay is looking like a really dangerous team going forward. And that should make for some great hockey in the second half of the season. Number 11, moving up 4 spots from last week. So again, the movement is in the top half of the board. And moving up 4 spots is Vegas. The Vegas Golden Knights still dealing with a lot of injuries, but they've started to find a way to win despite the injuries. So it does mean, you kind of have to change the way you're playing. I think Logan Thompson's plays got better in the net as well. That definitely helps when your goaltender starts putting up the numbers that he can. And yeah, Vegas definitely looks like they should be top 3 in the Pacific. It looks like it's going to be Edmonton, Vancouver, Vegas, top 3 in any order. Second half of the season, anything can happen. And that's where it gets tough for teams like the Kings, the Flames, San Jose. You're fighting it out for basically 2 spots and maybe end up being 1 because there's going to be teams from the Central that are pushing for that spot too. But yeah, Vegas definitely has turned things around, and so they move up 4 spots from last week. Number 10, moving up 2 spots from last week is Dallas. So Dallas, they got spanked by Philly, and then they go in and they beat New Jersey. So the Philadelphia spankage that took place, I didn't get too upset with that. I mean, kind of. As a Dallas fan, I wasn't happy about it, but I do like how they bounced back from it. And I thought that was also a statement for just how smothering Philadelphia can be and how frustrating they can be to play against. So I didn't punish Dallas too much for that because Philadelphia is not on the board yet, are they? So Philadelphia's a pretty good team. So if you get beat up by a pretty good team, you don't necessarily get moved down the board as much. So Dallas is in the top 10 this week. We'll see where they are next week. They're playing again tomorrow, of course, in New York against the Islanders. That should be a fun watch. Number 9, the last team in this row, dropping 3 spots from last week. I don't think they've been out of the top row all season. New York, the Rangers. So the Rangers dropped 3 spots. It was the loss against the Kings tonight that finally made me say, you know what, I'm going to drop them into that second row. The New York Rangers have had their struggles. They are not playing great. I think the thing for the Rangers too is if Carolina and Philadelphia keep breathing down their neck and end up bumping them down in the standings, maybe that'll end up being what really brings them out of this. But for the Rangers, it's baffling because it's the same team. Not huge amount of injuries that you're dealing. Like there's some injuries, but everybody's dealing with some injuries. I feel like the Rangers, maybe there's a lack of focus, a lack of just a real lack of that compete level, that desperation level you're looking for from a team seems to be lacking with the Rangers right now. And so the teams they're playing against have that desperation in their game. The Rangers haven't. And so we'll see if it changes as we move on into the All-Star break this week. Number 8. So now we're into the top row. And back in the top row, moving up 2 spots from last week, the Flyers. Yeah, the Flyers are back in the top row. And I wouldn't have thought that was going to be the case this season. And then, they had the good start, and then they went on that losing streak, and it felt like, well, that was fun, that winning streak at the start of the season, but they're back to being the Flyers. Nope, that's not the case. This is a Flyers team that looks like they are willing to work for it. Maybe the hardest working team in the league. I don't know how you measure work. I don't know how you would measure that. I don't know if there's a stat that tells you who's working the hardest. I don't know if you go with skating. I don't know if you go with shot blocking. I guess you have to come up with some kind of formula. There should be a formula for that. If there's an advanced stat for that, I'll have to go look that up because I think there should be a way to find out who's working the hardest. The one thing though is shot blocks are interesting because it may just mean you're allowing a lot of shots. So that's where shot blocking can be kind of a mixed bag. But Philadelphia belongs in the top row. Absolutely. Number 7, dropping 3 spots from last week. The Avs. So Colorado drops 3 spots from last week. Just up and down results on the road. Nothing to panic about, of course. The Avs are still in good shape. They get a win today. Was it today? I don't know. I don't know what day it is. I watched so much hockey today. I've done 3 different videos. Maybe I can go watch my reviews and refresh my memory. At any rate, Colorado ends up 7th this week. I don't anticipate them dropping out of the top row. It would take a lot for them to drop out of the top row, and I would not be surprised if they move back up next week. Just some sloppy results here and there, but nothing to worry about because Colorado's going to be hanging around first place in that division, and we'll see if they end up snagging first place at the end of the year or what happens. Number 6, dropping 1 spot from last week. And they drop 1 spot because they got passed. Carolina gets passed. Carolina had a good week. They did not drop because they had a bad week. They just dropped because they got passed. Carolina is still 6th on the board. They are the highest rated team from the Metro Division, and I honestly think Carolina should end up winning that division if the Rangers don't get this all figured out and get back onto the kind of run they were on earlier in the season. Carolina's a lot of fun to watch at times. They limited Detroit to 11 shots in that game where they beat them yesterday. But again, I didn't really punish Detroit for that, did I? Because Carolina's pretty good. And the shot suppression is really impressive with Carolina. If they can figure out a way to draw more power plays on the regular basis over, taking penalties, I think Carolina's going to be really, really dangerous. Like Stanley Cup level dangerous. And I know they're still a favorite for the Stanley Cup. Number 5, moving up 2 spots from last week. So who are the ones that foiled Carolina's number 5 spot? It's Boston. Boston moves up 2 spots from last week. I was really impressed with that game against Colorado. I think that's the best game Boston's played in weeks. Boston then goes out tonight against Montreal. Mediocre play through those first 2 periods, and then that third period, that was impressive. I understand it's Montreal. I know Montreal's down towards the bottom of the board. They're in that bottom row. But yeah, Boston really asserted themselves, and it feels like they're starting to really hit their stride, which might be bad news for the Atlantic Division because it looked like that spot was there for the taking for Florida. If Toronto could get their act together, it might have been there for them. But yeah, Boston may end up winning that division after all. We'll see if that is in fact the case. Number 4, a team that's chasing them, dropping one spot from last week, Florida. So the Panthers just dropped the one spot from last week because a team passed them. Florida, I don't think they had a bad week. I know that the results didn't necessarily go the way they wanted them to. They did lose that game against Minnesota. But with the winning they've been doing, and I think structurally their game's still fine. When I watch Florida games, I don't feel like, oh, they've peaked, they're going downhill. They're still playing well. So I'll keep an eye on it this week. Obviously, the power rankings next Saturday will be right before the All-Star break. Even though there's like 4 days worth of games, one of the reasons we're flying out on Sunday. We're flying out Monday morning, but we're leaving on Sunday. We're staying overnight in Seattle before we fly out early on Monday morning. Is because there really aren't very many games from Sunday through until Thursday. So I'm not really all that worried about what I'm going to miss while I'm in the U.S. And those power rankings will be one of the last videos that I do before we leave. We'll see where Florida is then. All right, number 3. Moving up 5 spots from last week. 5 spots. 5 spots from last week. Edmonton. So Oiler fans have probably been saying to themselves, he doesn't have Edmonton up yet. How high is Edmonton? 13 wins in a row will do that. Edmonton at one point this season weren't they last at one point this season? We're in uncharted territory. So one thing I have to do a video this week is just charting out where all these teams have been on the power rankings and how insane this run for Edmonton has been, because they looked dead and buried early in the year. It did not look like early in the season this was a team that's going to rally, going to get to the playoffs. This team was trash, yada yada yada. Now they've won 13 in a row, and at some point in time, even the naysayers are going to have to say, yeah, all right, fine, they're good. I'll admit it, they're good. But I'm not a naysayer. I think once they got things going, I just didn't bump them up that high on the board right away because I felt like, they're not there in the standings, but at this point, yeah, they're there in the standings. They're still winning. They're playing really, really well. And I've had absolutely no reason to even think about moving them down on the board. So then we get to number 2 and number 1. Now, this is where the fact that it's Hockey Day in Canada, at least on Sportsnet it was Hockey Day in Canada, and on CBC, the fact that we've got 2 more Canadian teams left, I want to call attention to the fact that I think this is the first time ever the top 3 teams on the power rankings board have all been Canadian teams. And we know that one of the ongoing narratives has been that Canadian teams don't win Stanley Cups, right? Haven't done that since 1993. Wouldn't it be magical if it finally happened in 2024? And it feels like there's some teams that can legitimately make a claim for Stanley Cup. Starting with number 2, honestly, if we're going to start with that, Edmonton would be in the running for that as well. And they've been a favorite since the start of the year betting-wise, which I do not do. I do not gamble. Number 2 on the board, Winnipeg. The Winnipeg Jets, good week. One thing with Winnipeg, in games against Ottawa and in a game against Chicago as well, just recent games, they've won games. They've pulled 2 points out of games where they haven't necessarily played well, and that is a sign of a team that finds ways to get points. That's important. But then when you look at the overall play, I feel like there's one team in the league that is playing better than they are, and hopefully in the playoffs they meet each other, because that'd be great. That'd be a conference final. That'd be absolutely amazing. But yeah, Winnipeg number 2 this week, same spot they were last week, meaning for the second straight week, number 1 on the board is the Vancouver Canucks. So I can't remember a time that's happened, that they've won back-to-back. Now, somebody did point out that I've had Vancouver number 1 on the board before, but that was a while ago. Now, what I'm going to do, too, I'm going to show you guys the difference. So I'm going to turn off, there you go. I turned off the studio light. Now you see, you get the shadow on my face, just so you guys can see which pucks are 1 through 5 and all that. But Vancouver's playing really, really well. And I can't remember a time where they've been number 1 in back-to-back weeks. So were they number 1 on the power rankings? Apparently they were many, many years ago. but I can't remember them ever being back-to-back uh, winners. Now, the fact that somebody could track that far back and go, oh yeah, they were number one. If somebody has a spreadsheet for all these years I've been doing power rankings, by all means, send it to the email address related to the channel, and I can use that data over this coming week. I would love to have that data because there's people, I guess, that track my power rankings in a way that I don't. During the year, I track them, but then from year to year, some rankings from previous years may fall off a bit. So if you have that data, by all means, email it, and I can use that for some video stuff that will go live while I'm down in Anaheim. So thank you guys so much for watching. As always, this has been the most unpredictable season I can remember in the NHL, which is fun. I like unpredictable. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.